You know the difficulty with talking about wisdom and love. They are such mysterious beasts, and they have been talked about for thousands of years, and no one has been able to package them in a way that's understood. You know, I think it's the fourth commandment, or maybe the third. Maybe mistaken, where God says that your tongue is far too impure, far too limited to even use the word God. Don't allow God to roll off of your tongue, because tongue is how you express your ideas through words, and your mind is profoundly limited, and limited by experience, limited by time, limited by history, limited by biases and prejudices. Therefore, it's best to always keep your mouth shut when it comes to trying to define wisdom or maybe even love, you know. So I think whoever tries to kind of come up with definitions or meanings have done has no choice but to do a relatively poor job that will ultimately disappoint. I'll tell you a story about love and wisdom, and then we'll move on to perhaps just putting things on the board in a much more scientific and rational way. It's kind of like the recipe. You know, there is a guy, let's call him, I don't know, Charles or Julian. They look at the schedule at a certain college and they say, philosophy. It sounds interesting. It's about people thinking about ridiculous things. I want to see what that is like. And so very casually, to some extent indifferently, they sign up for the class and they walk in the classroom. And after 15, 20 minutes, or maybe 2 or 3 weeks, they find themselves relatively curious. They find themselves slowly becoming interested in the idea. Ideas shared in the class, the conversations that people have, and they begin to fantasize, how would my life be if I was to talk about this stuff all the time, if I was to think about this stuff all the time, if I was to feel this stuff intensely all the time? And as you begin to entertain certain desires, they kind of take the snowball effect, they blossom. And all of a sudden you come to realize that that's really what you want to do. You just want to be around these ideas all the time. And so I can't put the story within the context of this classroom, so let me just go back and give you the original story. So there is this kid who is about to go partying with some of his friends. And this is about like the 8th century. So when I say partying, I don't mean smoking or drinking. I just mean probably just going to the mosque or going to play soccer or have some food somewhere. And so as they're walking, he hears this guy giving a talk or a sermon. Now, one of the things you need to understand about lectures and sermons is that lecture has a tendency of giving you a lot of information. It appeals to your mind, to your rational part. And it doesn't really inspire you, except inspires you to think. Not to feel, but to think. Sermons, on the other hand, what they do is they don't really care about what you think and how you think about things. They go directly to the emotional center. That's why when you hear a good sermon, you feel, but you don't think. And when you hear a good lecture, you begin to think. And oftentimes, a good sermon lacks the rational components, and a good lecture lacks the emotional components. And so what you need to do is bring the two parts together very harmoniously, so not only can you nourish someone's intellect, but also someone's emotional center. Anyways, as this kid is walking past by this door, he hears this man giving a sermon, and he just says, "This is really, really interesting." And he tells his friend, let's just sit back and listen for a few minutes and then we'll continue. And his friend says, I'm way too hungry. I'll just wait for you over there. And the guy says, okay. So he stands by the door and listens to this guy giving a talk. And he doesn't notice time passing, you know. And he just completely captured, consumed by what he's hearing. And after 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, when the sermon is done, he goes through the door and goes to the guy and says, I would like to be your student. Is that possible? The guy says, sure, it's always possible. You want to be a student, are you sure? The guy says, yes. Okay. And then this young man asks, so when is your next sermon? And the guy says, oh, no, that's not the way things work. Hello, Zani. Why don't you start cleaning the toilets for the next 6 months? And the kid says, I came here for your wisdom, not to clean the toilets. He says, no, if you want to be my student, the first thing that you need to do is wash the toilets. Now, it's something we've talked about all the time, that if you consider wisdom to be a great piece of art, which you want to master, sacrifices are needed. And, you can't easily submit to anyone. So if, for example, you were to come to this class and say, Amir, I want to be a great philosopher, or I want to major in philosophy, what should I do? If I was to say to you, why don't you come to class every morning and fix the seats and mop the floor? Say, that's not my job. And but if you were to do it, it illustrates a couple of things. First, that you have a great amount of respect for me. You fear me. You are fearful of my authority. God forbid you may even like me. God forbid even more, you may even love me. Because if you lack those components, there is no way in hell you're going to mop the floors and fix the seats, which means that you have to come here at like 7 in the morning. Okay? So because of the sort of way that this young man feels about this particular teacher, he says, fine, I'll do the toilets. So, and remember, whenever you make a sacrifice, behind every sacrifice there is this hope that if I sit and do this essay in the right way for the next 5 hours, I'll get an A. This A will take me to UC Berkeley. So remember, no one makes any sacrifices because it's fun. We all do it because we are a tax collector. In other words, you invest energy and then there is a reward waiting for you. That's what we function as human beings, okay? So this guy says, fine, I'm going to make the sacrifice. I'm going to clean the toilet bowls for the next 5, 6 months, and hopefully this guy will give me a piece of wisdom. And so after 6 months, this young man, and remember, all of us have a relatively inflated ego, that we are intelligent, we are clever, we have self-respect, and you're far too good to go to, say, the bathrooms and clean the toilet bowls. You belong to perhaps professions that are a bit more cleanly, being a CEO, being a manager. So for you to be kind of like I think it's the Gospel of Matthew, where he sits and washes the disciples' feet. Now, it's very symbolic because you have to understand where your feet go. Your feet, they go to the prostitute's house, it goes to the bathroom, it goes to the filthiest of places, it's always touching the dirt. So someone like the Messiah, kneeling, bringing about a bowl of water, and then washing your feet. It means that this is what Messiahs do. In Taoism, it's called being like water. And if you pay attention to what water does, it always seeks the lowest of the lowest of the lowest positions. If the water is coming down from the hilltop, it always goes into the ditches. I have not come for the righteous, but the sinners, okay? And so if you want wisdom, you have to be able to kind of lower yourself, be less than dust, be less than dirt. And so this gets us fine. So remember, the first stage to pursuing your path towards wisdom is you have to become extremely humble, that you have nothing, you're empty, you mean nothing, your life amounts to nothing, okay? And that before wisdom you bow. And so after 6 months is over, this young man goes to this teacher and says, I have done as you have said. I have washed the bowls, the toilets for the past 6 months. I need wisdom. He says, oh, no, 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 that's not the way it works. You now need to go into the kitchen and mop the floors for 6 months. Now, the second part is this. If you want to move towards wisdom, besides humility, you need a great amount of patience. You lack humility, wisdom is not going to come to you. And remember, wisdom chooses whom she wants to descend into. You don't choose wisdom, wisdom chooses you. Okay? So despite all the sacrifices you make, there's a good possibility that you may leave empty-handed. Okay? It's kind of like you wake up early morning and you're looking forward to coming to class, and as you're about to open the door and walking, you see a sign that says, Amir Sabzavari is sick, no class today. And you say, damn it, I did all this work. I woke up at 6, came here, and there is no class. And that's how wisdom works. There's a good chance that you may make a lot of sacrifice, a lot of effort, in the end, you have zero. And so, because of the yearning, the longing, the desire that this kid has about attaining wisdom, because he also is in love with this teacher of his, he says, okay. So he spends another 6 months of his life sacrificing himself in mopping the floors. Now he has spent 1 year, 6 months of it cleaning the toilets, another 6 months mopping the kitchen floors. And then he goes to the teacher and says, I've done my dues. Now, can you tell me how I can get wisdom? And the teacher looks at him and says, oh, no, wait. You need to start washing the dishes in the kitchen. So another 6 months washing dishes. Remember, while you're doing all of this, you're going through a great many doubts. Your friends are having fun. Your friends are graduating from school. Your friends are getting married. They're having a family of their own. They have jobs. They have houses. You could have been like them. Instead, you're sitting here washing dishes, mopping floors, cleaning toilets. And you say, what the hell am I doing? Maybe this guy is just manipulating, exploiting, deceiving, lying to me. So there is something about you that must conquer, overcome all the doubts that you may have. So remember, just because you're out there looking for wisdom, it doesn't mean that it's just going to be given to you easily. You have to go through all these trials and tribulations. And then after 6 months of washing dishes, you go to the guy and says, I'm ready for wisdom. He says, oh, no, no, no. It's time now for you to cook. So you spend another 6 months cooking. Then when the 6 months is over, you look at the guy and says, wisdom, please. He says, no, now you need to bring tea, serve tea to the people who are sitting in the lecture hall. So now you're serving tea. Then when the 6 months is over, you go to the guy and say, wisdom, please. And say, oh, no, no, now you have to serve food to the people. After that period is over, you go to the guy and say, wisdom, please. And he says, no, 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 now you can come and sit in the lecture hall. Now that is a great place to be. You're no longer in the bathrooms. You're no longer in the kitchen. You're no longer by the stove. Now you're actually sitting in the lecture hall. You can hear what this guy is talking about. Why does he spend so many of his months or years in the bathroom, in the kitchen? First, because he doesn't know how to learn. Second, because he doesn't know how to listen. Third, because he doesn't know how to be patient. And the bathroom, the kitchen, they're making food, the serving food, the making tea, the serving tea, they're all there as practices. Okay? These are ingredients that you need to have inside you. They season you. And now the teacher kind of realizes that this kid is ready. Not to understand, but to simply sit and have the patience to listen without understanding. See, you want to understand why you need to clean the toilets, but you're never told why. You want to understand why, when you began your quest seeking for wisdom, why you have to mop the floors, but you're not told why. And you have to be okay with the unknown. You have to be okay with the uncertainty. You have to be okay with the doubts. If you kind of refuse any of these steps, you're tossed out. Okay? Now, when you sit at the very end of the lecture hall, you can't really hear too well what your teacher is saying. Out of the 20 words that exit his mouth, you can only hear one of them. And you hear it very, very dimly, quietly. You don't even know what it is that you heard. Now, the reason for that is you need to walk away from the lecture hall, making sure you're not assuming that you heard. And making sure that you're not assuming that you know what your teacher said. So this confusion must stay with you for a long, long, long time. And remember, confusion is another aspect of humility. That you embrace the fact that you don't know. And you refrain from making assumptions. Okay? Then, as this old man looks at this kid and watches him and observes him and comes to realize that he's very patient. He keeps coming to the lecture hall despite not being able to hear much, doesn't understand anything. He keeps coming to the lecture hall. And that is very, very impressive. Then the teacher looks at this kid and says, now you can sit in the middle. I mean, after 10 years of being with this guy, now he can sit in the middle of the lecture hall. Now, out of 20 words that exit the teacher's mouth, he can hear 5. He still makes no assumptions. There is no certitude about anything. He doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't know anything. He lives in confusion, and he's okay with that. Because of his great love and yearning and longing for wisdom, but more importantly, for the teacher. Okay? After 15 years, the teacher looks at this kid and says, he's no longer a kid, he's like a grown man almost ready to die. Looks at this man and says, now you can sit, near me. And now he can hear everything. But he still doesn't understand. And that's another thing you need to grasp. Just because you hear things, it doesn't mean you're learning. And it certainly doesn't mean you're understanding. What it does suggest is you are hearing things. Okay? So remember, just because you're reading a book, it doesn't mean you're understanding. It just means you know how to read. Okay? Then, one day before the lecture begins, the teacher looks at all the disciples that he has and he says to them, when Julian wants to come in, don't let him. So Julian enters the lecture hall and the disciples kick him out. In fact, they beat him up. And he shouts, he screams, says, I've been here for 15 years. Why are you rejecting me? Now, here's the thing you need to understand. This is how the human organism works. When you interact with someone, when you interact with something, after a while you create habits. Habits become your home. Habits create belief systems. Habit makes you have all these assumptions about yourself, that you're a Christian or a Buddhist or a this or a that. And as long as you have habits, you have obstacles. Obstacles will not allow wisdom to enter into you. Wisdom only looks for people who are clean on the inside, not so much on the outside, on the inside. Now, the only person that he now has is the teacher. He sits with the teacher, he talks to the teacher. But one day, as he goes and knocks on the teacher's door and the door opens, the teacher looks at him and says, who are you? Well, I'm Julian. I don't recognize you. What? So what happens First, your community gives you meaning. That needs to be removed. Second, your teacher gives you meaning. That needs to be removed. And then the teacher goes to the town and says, when this guy sells you baskets, because he was a basket weaver, when he comes to sell you baskets, don't buy anything from him. So you got no community, no school to go to, you got no teacher, and even your village kind of pushes you away, saying, we don't know who you are. After 25 years, this once a young man, now middle-aged, in despair, having lost everything, he walks to the cemetery. That in itself is another symbol. Because though you may be walking, though you may be breathing, blinking your eyes, the truth is, you're like a lifeless corpse. You know, there is nothing about you that's alive. So you go to the cemetery and you just cry. And out of exhaustion, and you don't just cry, you know, what you say is, I spent 30 years of my life seeking wisdom. I have no understanding. I have learned nothing. I have no community to which I belong. I have no teacher who embraces me, and I have no village that gives me home. My home, it seems, is a cemetery. And he's screaming all of this, do you see? And then he falls asleep. While asleep, he has a dream. In the dream, God appears to him, or Jesus Christ, or Moses, or Muhammad, or the Buddha, doesn't really matter. And in that dream, there is this exchange of wisdom. God gives, Julian receives. And when I say Julian receives, I don't mean Julian receives in understanding. Julian inspired. For the first time, he's embraced by something he never imagined possible. He never even fathomed such things. Now you have found your third commandment. Keep Sabbath holy. That now you have found a resting place. You don't rest in drugs. You don't rest in school. You don't rest in books. You don't rest in Bible or the Quran or the Dhammapada. You don't rest in parents. You rest in the wisdom that has been given to you by God, or this dream. Okay? Now the teacher, knowing exactly what he has put this kid through, okay, tells his disciples, let's go to the cemetery. I'm guessing that's where the kid is. That's where Julian is. And they all walk to the cemetery with a lit candle, you know, and the teacher looks at him and says, what do you think? He says, I served you for 30 years. You made me homeless. And the teacher says, it is because of your homelessness that God revealed himself to you. Now, that's an interesting, the story ends, and what you need to extract from the story is the following. The only thing that any good teacher can do is to create the right physical, the right emotional, the right intellectual environments for you. And if you are worthy, and I'm not quite sure how people are made worthy, if you are worthy, Sophia from above looks down and says, Julian is homeless physically. Julian is homeless intellectually. Julian is homeless emotionally. And because of his great longing for the Spirit, Julian has been homeless spiritually as well. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the kingdom of God. Now that they see poverty, homelessness about you, they say, let's go down and pay him a visit. Now wisdom is given to you. So when you ask about wisdom and how it can be attained, I just gave you a story. You have to go through all those things. Now, here's the thing you need to understand about those. There are two camps who attain wisdom. There are those that we call, well, this is no good. There are those who, this is no good. This is probably no good either. Okay, good. So there are those who get to wisdom by making a great amount of effort and sacrifice, and there are those who are gifted. Someone like Mozart, he is gifted. Someone like Jesus, he is gifted. They are born and they know exactly what they want to do. Okay? Now, if you were to go to Mozart and say, "Can you teach me piano?" He says, "Are you kidding? I'm Mozart. You can barely walk. Why the hell would I want to spend my time, waste my time teaching you piano? Get lost." And even if Mozart was foolish enough to accept you as a student, you would frustrate him. You would bore him because he has to start with the ABCDs of this particular craft. And he doesn't have patience for that. I remember when we wanted to send our kids to learn piano, I called this woman. She was Persian. She was in her 50s, I think, and she's very, 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 very good. And we said, we have kids, 5 and 6. Will you teach them? And she says to us, "Mr. Sabzavari, can I be honest with you?" I say, "Sure, sure. I'm no longer 20. I'm no longer 30 or 40. I'm in my 50s. And the truth is, I no longer have patience to work with 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. I have students who are willing to teach, and they're in their 20s. They're really, really good. Have your kids work with my students. And then if my students tell me that your kids have talent, then I will be more than happy to accept them." So the point I'm trying to make is when you're dealing with people who are gifted, and when you are gifted, you don't need to make sacrifices as a novice. You're never a novice. You're gifted. It means that you have certain components that most people don't have. So you are able to learn things much, much faster, much quicker. There was a guy in America, I don't know exactly where he lived, maybe Utah. His name was Edgar Casey. Have you heard of him? He's called the American Prophet. Something really interesting happened to him. He was kind of depressed most of his life. And then one day, out of exhaustion, as he was reading this book, he just puts his book down on the table and he rests his forehead on the book and he goes to sleep. And he wakes up and it seems that all the contents of the book now lived inside his head. And he was able to kind of just touch a book or go through a book, like a 500-page book, within like a minute. And he could remember every single page. And then he had this talent of people calling him from like different states saying, "I have cancer. Is there anything that you can give me? Insights, any medicines?" And he says, "Well, keep talking, let me hear your voice. And I'm going to feel your emotions through the phone. And I'm going to feel your body through the phone." And then he would prescribe for them a certain medication. So someone like Edgar Casey is what they call a gifted human being. They don't really to make much effort. They just have certain qualities about them that are mysterious, okay? Those people can never be good teachers. Okay? If, for example, you come to me and say, "Amir, what's the best way to get married? Who should I choose?" Now imagine that my marriage was arranged and I was fortunate enough to have a very, very decent companion. We have never fought, and if we have fought, it's always been mild. I wouldn't know much about struggles of relationship. I wouldn't know much know about fighting. I wouldn't much know about you sleeping on the sofa, disagreements, none of those things, okay? If on the other hand, I was in the first camp, effort and sacrifice, which means that I get married, it happened to be the wrong companion, I have to exercise patience. I have to compromise. I get to understand the complexities of the relationship. So when you come to me and you say, "Amir, I want to get married, is this the right person?" I say, "Julian, this is what I went through. There's a good chance that you're going to go through all the stuff." Okay? So one of the things you need to understand between a gifted teacher and someone who is made, who works really hard to become good at something, they know the steps, whereas these people don't. Okay? These people can inspire you, but that's all they can do. Now, so let's go back. This is Sophia, wisdom. Okay. Just to go back and refresh your memories, remember in wisdom, what you have, data. In wisdom, you will find data. In wisdom, you will find information. And in wisdom, you will find knowledge. In the absence of wisdom, you will have data and it's lifeless. You wouldn't know what to do with it. Okay? You will have information. And then you could have the illusion that because you have data and information, you are knowledgeable. So in wisdom, remember, first seek the kingdom of God and everything shall be given to you. If you go looking for wisdom, and if you have the patience and you have the craftiness of being able to make lots of sacrifices, data, information, and knowledge will slowly be given to you. Okay? Now, one thing you need to understand about data, information, and knowledge, and this is very, very important. Consider data to be ingredients. Chicken, celery, potatoes, onions, salt, pepper. Ingredients. Information is the recipe. Okay? You have the ingredients, you have the recipe. But just because you have the ingredients in the recipe, it doesn't mean that you're going to get it right. So what happens is the following. You begin to experiment or cook or mix the ingredients according to the recipe. You will try over and over and over and over again until you're able to cook something that's delicious. Now what you have is this thing called knowledge. Inside this knowledge, you know what ingredients you need to use. You also know how to use the recipe. Okay? Now, to get to this thing called knowledge, you need experience. The problem with experience is this. If you try something you have never done before, there's a good chance you're going to fail. But you need to be extremely committed. You can't give up. And that's where knowledge is attained. You have wisdom. Inside wisdom, there are ingredients. Let's say the steps, ways you need to make sacrifice. Okay? Then you need a recipe. How do you make these sacrifices? How do you bring the ingredients of wisdom in a way that's applicable? And then you got to experiment over and over and over again. Then you have knowledge of how to make wisdom applicable. You bring it to life. Right? Now, having said that, now let's talk about how you're made into a customer of Sophia or wisdom. Okay. Should I continue? Are you still interested? Is this boring? Because I can change. No? You sure? Don't be shy. Okay. I'm going to put Socrates up here, and we're just going to say that he is the possessor of wisdom. Okay? And I'm going to put Julian / Charles. Okay? Now, Julian happens to be 20, Charles happens to be 20. Now, you guys have your own lives. You are in the cradle of pleasures that come from the iron stage, passions, physical, bodily passions. You're also in the cradle of bronze. You're going to school, you want to get A's, you're working and you're saving your money. And you're also very much in the cradle of silver. You're good to your parents, you have siblings you take care of. Whatever money you save, you spend it on groceries for your family. Now, each of these have their own fears, their own worries and concerns. Your life is profoundly meaningful. Going to school is meaningful. Having a job is meaningful. As one day you're walking, say, to Pete's Coffee, there is a man outside of the shop and he's talking. Or there is something about him that's a little curious, okay?